Good evening. My name is Marjorie Gans, and I'm a member of the board of the Writers' Room of Boston. I am delighted that you could join us this evening for the June reading in our virtual series, Readings from the Room, which began 1 year ago, well, actually more than a year ago, in March 2021. For anyone new to us, the Writers' Room of Boston is a co-working space in downtown Boston for any and all writers, both established and emerging, who want or need a quiet place to write. The room is open 24 hours a day. It provides desks and silence and the quiet companionship of other writers. We've been serving writers of the greater Boston area since 1993. Please contact us if you're curious or you have any questions, and check out our Instagram posts where there are photographs from within the room, sometimes areas around the room that will give you a sense of what it's like to be in there, and also announcements of things that are happening in the room. We'd be delighted to have new members, and we now have different levels of membership. So there's a virtual membership for anyone who can't easily make it to the room. And if you're interested, please contact our program director, Leslie Ostrow, at info.writersroomofboston.org. In 2022, we launched this new reading series as a way to reach out to the writing community during the pandemic, and a way to share wonderful writing from both those established and emerging writers. Some of the readers call or have called the Writers' Room home. Some are now from different parts of the country, which we've been able to do as a result of having Zoom. Tonight, we have Fatima Kara and Rebecca Kaiser Gibson. Fatima is a fiction writer from Zimbabwe who currently lives in North Carolina, and Rebecca is a poet and novelist living in New Hampshire. As we go along, feel free to use the question and answer, the Q&A feature in the box at the bottom of the screen, and you can type your questions there. We'll have time for them at the end. This series is made possible by grants from the Mass Cultural Council, Boston Cultural Council, and we also rely on friends. If you enjoy this program, please consider making a contribution using the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Also, we will be recording this reading, and a replay will be available on our website. It's going to take a little bit of time to get on the website, but it will be there. We'll begin this evening with Rebecca Gibson. Rebecca's poetry collections are Girl as Birch from 2022 and Opinel 2015 from Bowen Publishing. Her poems have appeared in Agni, Barrow Street, forthcoming, Field, Green Mountains Review, Greensboro Review, Interim, Harvard Review, Massachusetts Review, Ocean State Review, Passengers, Salamander, Slate, Tupelo Quarterly, and Verse Daily, among others. Her first novel, The Promise of a Normal Life, is forthcoming from Arcade Publishing in 2023. She has received fellowships from MacDowell, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, Vermont Studio Center, Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and was a Fulbright Scholar teaching poetry in India. After teaching poetry at Tufts University for 23 years, she founded The Loom, which is poetry in Harrisville, New Hampshire. It's a poetry reading series, and you can learn more about Rebecca and her work at www.rebeccakaisergibson.com. Rebecca, it's all yours.
Hi, thank you, Marjorie. Whoop, you left. And thank you, Writers' Room, and thank you, Fatima. My book, Girl as Birch, I'm going to read the first poem, which is also called Girl as Birch. The whole book is really about the female experience. And I noticed when I first observed birches, the way they bend in the wind and sometimes stay there, that seemed like the experience of growing up female, the accommodation to forces. And hopefully, after the winds of whatever strength from whatever direction cease, the tree rights itself, as hopefully does the girl. Girl as Birch. Pretending, compliance, pliant, ancient lenience, according to a faulty credo, any agile gesture equals allure. Then, when wind abates, stature regained, a realignment, silent-limbed, liminal, resilient as a branch pushed from the path and springing back. Of course, some of the forces that a young female has to accommodate to are the males in her life. This poem is called Zeus, and it used watching my father in the backyard during a thunderstorm. Zeus, bow-legged in blue work shorts, between waist-high stumps, massive chest streaked with garden soil and sweat, the world, his broad back, the sun set over. Called for bath and bed, she'd waited, hoping he might see and wave. Her sister stopped because she did. The sky swirled dark, his hair whipped black, a sudden coursing rain, silver blurred all but his unwaved arm, upraised as if to greet the lightning. There are lots of gardens in this book, and a notion of the walled garden, the sort of safety and beauty of a walled garden, but also the intense isolation from the rest of the world. This is called, well, there's also a lot of snakes, but I'm not reading too many snake poems, about gardens. If she'd stayed walled in gardens, blushing poppies, shaded in foxglove, scaled by long-leaved clematis, all that after, before her, she'd have kept a visible shape, reading the summer years. Inside garden walls, she knew early motion, winds that sway, stalks that bend and rise, uncanny and exact. Had she inside found her way by coxcomb, phlox and daisies, turquoise skies, her feet in dirt and stood, she'd have known where she'd be home, and known in mounded ground, swaths of luscious green and splash, a repetition of each hue in herself, a young girl, straw-hatted, hoping for the right someday to be where laughter is, voices sharp as green grapes, skin transparent veils. I'm sort of skipping through, it does move somewhat chronologically, and here is the girl at 9. Way too bold. Her turquoise swimsuit exposed white thighs, spoke shame before she spoke. At 9, she bet, I'll swim the whole lake, it's only a mile. Her father took the bet, $1.50, said he'd row by her. With worn out oars, he creaked. Her own arms cleaved the green as silently as fish. Halfway across Lake George, she plunged under in full stroke, out of sight, at last, unmeasured triumph. This one is 2 a.m. at 14. The just past full moon elicits wild dogs' siren keening, echoing between massive dark mountains, hours past bedtime as she tiptoes into larger dark. Possibility thickens the clouds to condensation just short of pouring. Her hands pause on the porch railing, barefoot reaching the first step. And now a little later, Kama Sutra. Not by accident does the thigh hitch high over thigh to dangle a lean shank, or warm feet think to curve on a step's sharp stone. See, There is no zone not possibly urgent, no tilted neck, no knee not entreating, no palm flesh-faced, not open to stroke, to crave. But we women fast forget we once didn't know our breasts could crowd our dress, our precious islands raised from a sophomoric sea, the praise of sudden boys backing away and watching. They seem so artificial, then in no time, part of artifice we bear smugly, our proud prows. This poem called Donut Shop, I'm particularly reading because of Boston. This was written in a Somerville Dunkin' Donut shop. Donut shop. It went without saying. For instance, she was noticed top to toe, stopping amidship, no matter what she wore. He knew when to look eye to eye, when to touch her to mean, she's mine. The still beneath his words hid his history, dark as rhododendron in a West Virginia wood. She was there with a guy whose uncles tossed him into manhood in a San Francisco shipyard, where men meant muscle, hoisted barrels, whose avarice was signaled, not like academics, by not talking. She'd seen his fenced-in thigh. She'd entwined like jewel weed that pride of hawthorn, isolate, his tender limbs gone hard. Still, he held his coffee cup as she might a dove. And I'm going to read two more. Hear the wind. The first month after she leaves, already she hardly remembers him, only the blue. All those years she pumped her own steady wings and flew only to the overhanging eaves. All those slanted dawns she woke to a mirror, her eyes shut. Now she dreams in the dark, wide-eyed to every wind that carries her. I do miss seeing you all. I'm glad you're there, wherever you are. And this last poem is called Nudged. It features a mullein, which is a yellow flower, grows sort of suddenly and very tall and straight. Nudged. Since I am breathing today, why not notice how absorbing the stamina of mullein, pulsing, salubrious, yellow, upright. And in spite of not witnessing on purpose, I am witness to quivering diversity, no space, not clovers or wild winking. I am breathing, a tumbled spore of earth and siphoned starlight commingling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. I have lots to ask you about that when the time comes. That was wonderful. Really, thank you so much. Our next reader is Fatima Kara. Fatima Kara is an Indian writer born in Zimbabwe. Her novel, The Train House of Lobengula Street, grows out of her childhood experiences in the Indian community in Bulawayo, Rhodesia, and the racial discrimination that was extended toward all non-whites. She has an MFA from Spalding University in Kentucky and was shortlisted for the 2020 Laxfield Literary Launch Prize. When not writing, Fatima propagates fruit and nut trees and plants them in schools and rural communities around Zimbabwe. Fatima, it's all yours.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, Rebecca. The main characters in the excerpt I will read are Kulsum and her husband Razak and their daughters, Zora and Rihanna, Chacha and Sakina, and their sons, Abdullah and Mehboob. One evening in the kitchen of the train house, Zora instructed, "Shut the door, Shafiq, the supper will get cold." The day had been sweltering hot, but now a storm was brewing outside. No one had noticed heavy purple clouds gather and race each other in the sky. Because of the loud chatting in the kitchen, no one heard. The wind turned from a rustle to a swish to a howl until a silver flash of lightning cracked the sky open, snuffing out the light in the kitchen for a few moments. A thunderclap boomed. Amira screamed. Zora took the little one into her arms. The family loved mealtimes, but not Razak. He could not wait for meals to be over. When Razak opened the kitchen door to leave, a gust of wind rushed in, and in that moment, Kulsum saw her young pawpaw tree laden with half-ripe fruit fall to the ground. A moan escaped her. She looked around for the umbrella, but Shafiq said, "You can't go outside in this storm, you must." But no one heard him finish his sentence, for a terrifically loud thunderclap drowned all conversation. As they sipped their tea, nobody expected Sakina to come in the door. "Assalamu alaikum," she greeted. "What a storm. We just made it. We've been sitting with Razak this past quarter of an hour." Sakina and Chacha, Abdullah's parents, had driven from their house 4 blocks away. Sakina gave Shafiq her theli, and he tipped it out onto the table. As bodies leapt up to pounce on the chocolates, Sakina clasped Kulsum's hand and they slipped out. They walked into the sitting room and found Razak and Chacha deep in conversation. The 2 women sat close together on the sofa against the wall. The moment Razak and Chacha had a lull in their conversation, Sakina said, "Razak Ba, we've come with 2 proposals. Our Abdullah with your Zora and Mehboob with Rihanna." Kulsum could not speak. This came straight from merciful Allah. Joy flooded her heart. "The thoughtful and wise way Kulsum has brought your daughters up, we could never find better wives for our sons," Chacha said. Kulsum had not expected this. She thought they'd look for wives for their sons from their qawm in Nyasaland or India. Kulsum smiled. "Abdullah and Mehboob will make good husbands. May Allah bless the unions." Kulsum squeezed Sakina's hand. "What am I sitting here for? Some sugar to celebrate." As she stood up, she saw Razak glaring at her. She stopped and looked from Razak to Chacha to Sakina and back at Razak. "Come, let us leave," Chacha said to his wife. And in that moment, Kulsum realized that Chacha knew that Razak had no intention of giving his daughters in marriage to his family. Kulsum saw the pain etched in gentle Chacha's face. Razak's eyes were cast to the floor. Chacha and Sakina walked out. Razak called her name, but she followed them to the car. I'm sorry, she kept muttering. As they got into their car, she waved at them, but they did not wave back. Oh, why had Razak humiliated them? Kulsum stood at the gate. Raindrops from the bougainvillea fell on her head. The ephemeral joy of having her daughters married close to her in the same town had vanished. She heard Razak call her name, but she leaned against the gate and covered her head and face with her blue scarf. She wanted the world to go away. But a small part of her thought that perhaps she could still fight for her daughters. She left her muddy slippers outside the veranda and walked into the sitting room. You are so unrefined, village woman, Razak said. Your mother never taught you Kumbar etiquette. Kulsum's jaw fell open. She looked at Razak. His eyes were bulging with anger. Could you not shut your mouth for once? Razak exploded. When a proposal comes, the father of the daughter makes the decision. Am I the father? Are these my daughters? Maybe another man fathered them. Kulsum felt a heavy weight on her chest. You, the father. The father makes the decision, and I say no. His shadow fell across her face and head. I don't understand, Kulsum said. We've known them for over 15 years. They are God-fearing Muslims with love in their hearts for us. They're not rich, but they have integrity. The sons are good like the father. If we search to the ends of the world, we could not find more honest, hardworking husbands. Think again. Think again? You need to stop thinking. Are you the head of the family? Tell me, who is the head of this family? Because you built this train house, you think you the head. You are the head. Of course you the head, she reiterated in a frightened voice. I've always respected you as the head of our family. Fat-headed, that's what you are. I'll not tolerate my daughters marrying out of the Kumbar Qawm. Why would I put hardship on them? He demanded. All this talk of Kumbars made Kulsum's head hot, and she asked, what's the difference between Kumbars and Khatris? Are we not from the same area in Gujarat? Don't we speak the same language, worship the same God? Ha! We are potters, he explained with a superior air. Kulsum said she never saw any pottery going on in Hunyana. All she saw were young, old, and middle-aged Kumbar men load donkeys with salt and take them from village to village. This made him even madder, and he told her to shut up. Kulsum said, you're a successful man. If you stand by your daughters, society will take their cue from you. They'll say, Razak Qasim is an honest man and we respect him. If he accepts his daughters to marry out of Qawm, then we'll follow suit. Razak clapped his hands. For an illiterate woman, that's a fine speech. Kulsum wanted to crumple to the floor, but she clutched the back of the settee and stood tall. Why do you think the Kumbar families in Rhodesia have not come with proposals for our daughters? He asked. Kulsum stood there mute. It's because you insisted on educating them, Razak yelled. Had I listened to the elders from the beginning, it would have been easier to settle my daughters, for they would not be over-educated. Ha! This man had no common sense. Layer upon layer of inadequacy was choking his sense of reason. A potent force was building up inside him. He saw the strength of it, but did he? And then you put Zora on stage to be Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz like a common girl, so that low-down Khatris can insult me and ask for my daughters. Next, we'll have Christians asking for them. The anger in his voice made Kulsum recoil. He raised his voice. Society's rules are there for a reason. Look at Amar. He has broken every rule. His life's a mess. Small wonder society shuns him. Look how Rani suffers like a prisoner. Kulsum said, Rani does not suffer like a prisoner. She has Amar's love and devotion. Amar insisted nurse train her as a medical assistant. And today, when nurse is out of town, it's Rani who's running the clinic. You speak ill of a man who has been your loyal friend through all your hardships. Allah puts people in our lives for a reason. Don't make our family suffer. A union with them will benefit us all. But when Razak said that he was going to look outside the country, Kulsum let out a low cry of despair. Please, Razak, I want my daughters near me. Please don't send them far away. It will break my heart, Kulsum sobbed. She saw the look in his eyes harden, but continued. Surely, if we're patient, there's still time for proposals to come. Zora is only 19. Her scarf fell to the floor. She wanted to pick it up, but at the same time, she wanted to hold his gaze. Illiterate woman, Razak bellowed. Don't you see that no one will want to know our daughters if we break Qom rules? Do I want my daughters isolated and shunned by society? I tell you, it's not in my hands, it's in Allah's hands. No, it's not in Allah's hands. My girls' kismets are in your evil parents' hands, whose values are dictated by the whims of society. They've never had our daughters' welfare at heart, she said. Please, Razak, I don't want my daughters to go far away, Kulsum implored. When my father died, I only learned of his death 10 days later, when he was cold in his grave. My children never had loving grandparents to spoil them. I've lived all of my married life without a single blood relation nearby. Why make our sweet-natured girls suffer? Please, Razak, my daughters are my life. He did not respond to her plea, and she was injured. Kulsum wanted to get as far away from him as possible, but first she must pick her scarf up. She stretched her hand and reached for her scarf and let out a cry when his shoe came down on her fingers. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Oh, have I not got it? There we go. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Rebecca, you're back with us. So I actually have questions for each of you, but even so, just listening this time, I'm struck that you're both, as different as your readings are, you're both kind of writing about the same thing in very different ways, about sort of girls and women, and what you were saying, Rebecca, about the birch that bows and hopefully doesn't break and hopefully comes back. In listening to your poetry, Rebecca, I don't even have a simple question, but I was struck by what seemed to me a kind of combination of both melancholy and hope. And I'm wondering if that was in there for at the same time. I was wondering if I could ask 12 questions. My problem is I put too many questions in one sentence. But is that in that for you, that combination?
I don't have that outside perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of it as melancholy. That's interesting. Or even hope, but I think you're probably right. You know, I don't know how to come up with those abstractions, but I appreciate it when people do. So yes, there's definitely pull in opposite directions through almost all of them.
And I think partly what's interesting is, what does someone hear? Because somebody else might say, oh yes, those were in there, I put them in there. But what you're saying is, wow, no, I mean, I didn't think.
Well, I didn't put them in there, but I think you're right, they're there.
Exactly. And the other thing I'll just comment on, and then I have a question for Fatima, is to me, it seemed, I don't always feel adept with poetry. And what I felt listening to you was that you have all this depth, and yet the poems are so accessible, which I'll just say I really appreciate it as someone.
Thank you. I mean, I love that. I'm so glad. That's what I'd like. I don't want to minimize it to make it easy to understand, but I also don't want to make it obscure on purpose, you know, so.
No, I mean, to me, it was
great if it had that effect. Thank you.
It was a wonderful combination of deep and accessible at the same time. So
thanks.
And Fatima, I wanted to ask you sort of things that were a little more, just to give us some context, because I have a context because I actually know you, I know both of you, but to give a context to the readers in terms of when was this novel set, and how representative was this couple of maybe other couples at that time, or was she ahead of her time? Was he more conservative? It's again, too many questions in one sentence, but.
Okay, so the novel and the story of Kulsum and her struggle to educate her children, her daughters especially, to give them an English education, is set 1940s to about 1968. That's the novel, and it's what happened to this community, this unique community in Bulawayo, where they all worked together, and it was cultural complexity, and what, you know, by educating their daughters, what they gave up. And the men were reluctant to educate their daughters because they were afraid that they would become too modern and not keep the tradition. And but they did agree, and they didn't know all the obstacles that would come with it, because Kulsum was hell-bent on educating her girls, but then it was difficult to get them married. And so it was all those cultural complexities, and the men gave their permission for the girls to be educated, but they did not want them to have freedom. They wanted them to continue to follow the rules of society, religion, tradition. So that was the whole. And what was your other question? You said how representative.
Yeah, I mean, in that period of time, is that a fight that other mothers would have been having with other fathers about their daughters?
Yes, in that community, it would have. It would have, but they were also quite advanced, because the women, the larger society, there was segregation in the larger society, so they couldn't look outside their community for any kind of help. So they were in a cocoon, but they looked after each other.
Yeah.
And they helped each other, and they worked together to overcome their cultural problems.
Okay. It is 33 minutes past the hour, and that's fine. And there were not particular questions. There was a very appreciative comment in the chat section to both of you. But I think we usually bring it to a close at 7:30 so people can have their dinner, feed their cats, do whatever they do. And thank you both so much. That was just, I think, a wonderful reading. And you both, Fatima, that book's going to come out. I know that book's going to come out.
Thank you.
Rebecca, you have things out, and you have another book coming out. So please keep these wonderful authors in mind. And next, in July, we have our next reading, and it will be Candelaria Silva Collins and Cyrus McQueen, and that's July 20th. So please join us then. Good night, all.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.